Oh, as we said last time, television is more prevalent than bathtubs, not so much telephones. In the old days, telephones used to be attached to the wall with a wire. Not anymore, we've all got one in our pockets. 2/3 of the homes have 3 or more television sets. Television is on an average of 7 hours a day. Let's see, I get home at 5 o'clock. No, it's not on 7 hours a day. Each member of the family watches an average of 4 hours of programming. Women watch more television than men. Non-whites watch more television than whites. Preschoolers and retired people watch the most. Less educated watch more than highly educated people. 6 to 10 television shows contain violence. I'm trying to think of, well, that's the old days. I don't think, well, if people are watching Netflix and they're watching cable, so yeah, probably. Fist fights were long drawn-out affairs, unlike reality, where injury usually limits the fight due to a broken jaw or broken hand. Fights really, your hand isn't made to hit things with. Unless you're, I don't know, you practice Taekwondo, you really can't hit things very, as readily as they show it on television. Normally what will happen is, as long as you hit the front knuckles, you're okay. If you hit this knuckle, you break this bone all the way down into your wrist. If you hit the outside, it's even worse, because you'll get a spiral fracture in this bone right here, and then they'll have to put a pin in. And it goes all the way down into your wrist. And sometimes when, yeah, okay. So if you don't, so that means the guy's got to stand there and you've got to hit him. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But if he ducks and you catch him with a glancing blow, now you got a broken hand and he's not hurt at all. If you hit somebody in the nose, then you break their nose, they start it'll break the blood vessels in their face, and their eyes will start watering and they can't see. So that's one of the reasons why they tell you if you're going to fight somebody, then try to hit them in the nose, because if you hit them in the jaw, of course, this is really hard. I mean, there are places that you can hit people that it's like punching the wall, and you hit somebody in the top of the head, for example. We've seen this over and over again in prize fights, where the guy started to punch and the guy ducked like that. He punched him in the top of the head and broke his hand. We see that all the time. Jaws are relatively hard if you hit it on the point, but if you catch it on the side, you can break somebody's jaw. So, fights don't really last that long. I mean, not to my experience, not that I've been in fights, but in the emergency room, you always talk to somebody. You can't hit somebody without doing damage to them. Their eye swells up, their mouth swells up, they start bleeding from the nose, they start bleeding from the mouth. And usually fights don't really last that long. 3/4 of the time the aggressors went unpunished on television. 58% of the time the victims were not shown to exhibit pain, but the reality is, of course, you hit somebody, this is the most sensitive area of your body, is your face. So, well, except for if you're a male, and your testicles. Only 5% of violence was shown to have long-term consequences, but the reality is, of course, you hit somebody in the head, potentially they're going to have a concussion, they could get a skull fracture. There's a lot of damage that can be done. The orbital bone around your eye is relatively hard, but it breaks. It breaks relatively readily. And we see that from time to time. 2/3 depicted violence is funny. Let me see if I can get this thing to work. It never works. What am I talking about? Nah, it's not going to work. Okay, you guys don't get to see the monkeys, and that's okay. It was a funny fight scene from the monkeys. Children spend more time watching television than they spend in school. By junior high, the average child has observed 8,000 murders and about 100,000 acts of violence. And even the cartoons have violence on them. If you're watching Superman or Batman or the Avengers or the Justice League, it really doesn't matter. There's always a lot of violence taking place. Maybe not SpongeBob SquarePants, but just about everybody else. Always, I mean, there has to be a story, and usually, and violence is a story that people like to see. Some supporters of television violence and pornography as well purport that TV violence acts as a cathartic release, actually reducing the amount of violence. But the reality is that it's training individuals to fight. It's also training people that if you hit them or you Wile E. Coyote, how often does Wile E. Coyote fall off of a cliff and land with a puff down at the bottom of the cliff? He always comes back. Wile E. Coyote always comes back. There was a case in Chicago where 2 6-year-olds were trying to get their 2-year-old neighbor to steal candy for them. And one of them held the child out the window and let him go from about 6 stories up. Well, of course, it killed the child, but he claimed, well, he was only 6 years old. He'd seen it on the cartoon. He had seen it on cartoons all the time. He killed the kid. They killed the kid. The 2 of them did. But of course, they thought that he would bounce. I don't know. Maybe they didn't think he would die. They thought, just like Wile E. Coyote, he would bounce back. Where was I? Oklahoma City. I was working in Oklahoma City at Crooked Oak. Crooked Oak is a suburb of Oklahoma City. Crooked Oak used to get all the bad kids. If they were kicked out of another school, they always came to Crooked Oak. So it was a pretty rough place. But I had one child that had an intellectual deficit. But this kid was an amazing physical specimen. And he had been watching the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and evidently they do a lot of flips. It's a Japanese television show, and they do a lot of flips. And then they will flip all the way across the room, and then they'll stick their foot in your face. Well, he used to do this. He used to flip all the way across the playground, and then he would stop with his foot in somebody's face. I mean, literally, he was able to do this. He did this enough that the teachers were afraid that he was actually going to hit somebody. And one day, of course, he did. He caught somebody on the chin. So this kid used to come in. They wouldn't let him go outside at lunchtime to the playground because it was too dangerous for him to be out there. So he would come to my office while I was eating lunch, and we would have these long, drawn-out conversations. And sometimes we talked about TV violence. But this child learned how to do those flips by watching it on television, by watching the violence of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. I still don't understand the Morphin part or the Power Ranger part. They all have different colored outfits, and I'm not exactly sure if the pink lady and the red guy, I have no idea, and the green girl, I don't know. Research shows that television desensitizes people to violence, and this is the biggest problem. Not only that, but we can talk about video games, and of course we know that video games desensitize people to violence and death. And that may be one of the reasons why when we see a mass murderer, especially a teenage mass murderer, a lot of times they don't seem to understand that shooting somebody in the head is not only fatal, but it's also terminal. They don't seem to understand that. Anyway, they are desensitized. Television also does not represent a realistic world. As far as the desensitization is concerned, when you're playing a video game, what does it smell like? What does it smell like? It smells like electricity. Mm-hmm. That's about it. I mean, whatever the hell your room smells like, old dirty socks or whatever. Yeah, but when you shoot somebody and kill them, blood has an odor to it. Especially lots of blood has an odor to it. But I mean, they don't. You can't depict that in a video game. The other thing that happens is when you kill somebody, all of everything that they have sphincters. You have sphincters in your urinary tract. You have sphincters in your digestive tract that will hold the feces in. They'll hold the urine in. And one of the things that happens is a lot of times those sphincters relax, and of course they defecate themselves or they urinate themselves, which puts off an interesting odor from time to time. And blood does have a smell to it. And if they shoot them someplace other than in the head, well, we won't go into that. Okay, but if you shoot them in the stomach, and it opens up their intestinal tract, and we've got all whatever's been digesting, there are odors that people don't think about. And you can't depict it on a video game. So they don't really know. There is no realism to that aspect of it. Television also does not represent a realistic world. It tends to have more male characters. On television, about 2/3 of all the characters are male. In reality, there's only about 51% of the population is male. But we have a lot of male characters. Most people aren't married. We see only about 10% of the population on television that are married. In reality, 61% of the people in the United States are married. Most are blue-collar workers. On television, we only see about 25% of the television population as blue-collar. But the reality is about 2/3 of the population in the United States are blue-collar. Most seem to have no religious affiliation. They only talk about religion in about 6% of the people on television. In reality, about 88% identify with a religion. They consume a lot more alcohol than in reality. You will see drinking about 45% of the time on television. They're always mixing drinks to relax somebody. But the reality is only about 16% of the population drink on a relatively normal basis. Surveys of people who watch a great deal of television shows that they view the world as a more violent place than it actually is. They see it as more violent, especially if they watch the wrong television shows. I was reading a paper last night, and this lady was telling me that about immigrants smuggling drugs across the border. And because of that, we need to legalize marijuana. It didn't make any sense to me either. But she watches a show called Borderland, and I've never heard of Borderland, but evidently it's one of the cable television shows. If you watch Cops, you see that bald-headed Mexicans and black people are the ones causing all the problems. So the world is a much more dangerous place if you watch the wrong television shows. It should be interesting. I don't really watch Fox News because there's just too much opinion on it. Once upon a time, they used to brag about Fox News being the real news, and other news was made up news. Now they don't do that. They took that moniker off. So people who watch Fox News tend to see the world as a dangerous place. These are the individuals that are accumulating weapons and they're massing ammunition just in case there's an apocalypse or something. They are more fearful of someone coming into their home and more fearful of going outside and being attacked. One day I got a telephone call from one of those security agencies. And the guy was trying to sell me a security system. He said, we can put it in for $110. And I said, well, I don't really need a security system. I live out in the middle of nowhere. And he says, there's nobody around? Oh my God, you must be scared to death. I said, no, I'm not scared. It doesn't scare me. He said, well, what kind of security do you have? And I said, I have a very large dog. He said, well, what they do is they poison your dog and kill them, and then they attack you. And I was thinking, what a horrible thing to say. That somebody's going to poison my dog? Who tells you that kind of stuff? Well, somebody that is trying to sell you a security system. And I got upset, and I kind of swore at him a little bit.
Who poisons dogs?
Yeah, he obviously does. Bastard. Somebody's going to poison your dog and they're going to break into your house and rape your wife. Well, thank you. I was wondering what was going to happen next. These individuals also are more likely to read aggression into others' behaviors and interpret words as aggressive rather than neutral. Okay. Brian Mullen analyzed information from 60 lynchings that took place in the United States between 1899 and 1946, and discovered that the larger the number of people that attended the lynching, the more vicious the murder and mutilation, and that has to do with de-individuation, of course. And there's another picture of a lynching. Similar behavior can be seen with youth gangs. It's also seen with soccer fans, especially in England. We have the English are notorious for having hoodlums that wander around. Hooligans, they call them hooligans in England. England has been banned several times from world play because their fans will go to another country and they'll try to beat everybody up, or they will fight. And they have this hooligan thing going on. Soldiers, of course, de-individuation is very normal. Everybody has on the same clothes. You can't tell the difference between one and the other. Somebody starts a bloodlust, somebody starts killing people, and of course the soldiers, the other soldiers can't control themselves. Urban rioters, of course, we see the same thing. Sadly, school children in Scandinavia will mob on a child. They will bully them. It's not, and normally when we think of bullying, we think of one individual picking on another kid or picking on a series of children. But in Scandinavia, that's not what happens. This is Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark. It's called mobbing, and what they will do, they will find a child that is weak and they will pick on that child. And sometimes they will make the child tougher, and sometimes it will make the child fold, and of course the child can't function after that. Mob rules with a pack mentality, of course, and mobbing. It's such a horrible idea that you've got first graders that are picking on one select individual. Anyway, it's really kind of tragic. This is Russia. These guys are Russians. And this is an Englishman. He's attacking me. As you can see, he's kicking me. The English are really good at street fighting. My son was, he used to play soccer, semi-pro soccer in California. And this one time they picked up an Englishman. And the guy was calling for the ball all through the game. And of course they lost 2-1 or 3-1 or something like that. And after the game, he was just all upset with everybody, and he was yelling at everybody and calling everybody, all the negative things that English people refer to other individuals. And he came up to my son. My son played the front line with him. He played in, my son played one of the wings, and he was a center halfback. Then they moved him up to center forward. And he's always calling for the ball, and he never passed it to anybody else, and he wanted everybody to pass to him. And of course my son crossed it as much as he possibly could, but he got the ball whenever he got the ball. So after the game, the guy came up to him, and he started yelling at him, and he got closer and closer and closer, and Chris is going, okay, I'm not scared of you, And the guy came up and he got closer, closer, and closer, and all of a sudden he headbutted him. He hit him with his in the face with this part of his head. Well, luckily, Chris is relatively quick, and when he saw it coming, he moved back a little bit to the side, and he just barely caught him on the lip. If he caught him on the nose like he wanted to, it would have been a mess. Yeah. They kicked the guy off the team. He only played one game, but Chris was really upset. Brits, all bastards, every single one of them. I almost said something else. We're going to talk about prejudice next, and we can see where prejudice comes from. There are certain groups of people who consider themselves superior to everybody else, and one of those groups are the English. Whenever we'll talk about it when we talk about prejudice. So reducing aggression, catharsis. Some psychologists suggest that you need to allow people a harmless way to vent their anger and aggression. That's what sports, theoretically, that's what sports are for, especially the more violent sports like football, baseball, soccer. Soccer's a good one. I've played soccer all over the world. I'm not very good, but I usually get to play because I can run pretty fast, or I used to be able to. So I used to get to play. But it's really kind of interesting. A lot of people take their soccer very, very seriously. I think I've told you stories about when we were playing against the French. We scored a goal. As soon as we scored a goal, the guy that scored the goal, my God, they just kept taking him down. Not for any reason whatsoever. It's not like he had the ball and they were trying to slide tackle the ball away from him. They just started taking him down. We were watching an international game in Indianapolis. It was the Mexicans. It was Mexico versus who were they playing against? An African team, Nigeria, I think. Anyway, the Nigerians scored a couple goals, and all of a sudden the Mexicans they got yellow card after yellow card. They got a couple red cards. You know, they were brutalizing the Nigerians. They were trying to punish them for scoring all the goals, and of course they lost the game. And afterwards they wouldn't shake. Well, they never shake hands anyway. It was just a mess, just a mess. So some people take their soccer really seriously. However, while catharsis seems to work with other emotions, with aggression, it just seems to add extra fuel to the fire. I used to play a lot of soccer in Germany. And I never played for the Germans. I always played for us. But one time I scored a goal, and I hardly ever scored because I tried to play in the back. I was more of a defensive player. But once I scored, and actually I didn't actually score. I crossed the ball and the guy scored. But I ran the ball all the way down, and they couldn't catch me, of course, because I run so fast. Anyway, so after that, they took that guy out. I mean, they slid tackled him. They dropped him on his nose enough times that he came out of the game, scratched up his knees. This was on a gravel field. So then I became the target. And of course they couldn't catch me, so here I am running up and down the field, and they're banging into me, and you know, I played football, so I just kind of lowered my shoulder and caught them, you know. But finally they got me from behind, and they just kept dropping me as punishment for doing something right, as stupid as that sounds. Kind of a brutal sport.
It's kind of like angry bees.
It's ugly. Myers sees the only way of reducing aggression is to model and reward sensitivity and cooperation. I'm telling you about the times I was actually played fairly well. It's only been a couple times. All the rest of the time I didn't have to worry about anybody picking on me because I was not very good. I was really not a very good soccer player. I didn't start until I was like 25, so I'm pretty uncoordinated as far as soccer is concerned. But if you run fast, a lot of times they'll let you play. You can usually run people down. There we go. Okay, prejudice. So we're going to talk about prejudice now. Okay, we're going to talk about one of the most hated groups of people in the world, as odd as that seems. They live in a country with 1.2 billion people, and everybody hates them. That's 1 point. Well, there's about 2 million of them, so it's like a billion people hate these individuals. It's really kind of odd. Prejudice is a negative prejudgment of a group and its individual members. Some prejudgments can be positive, but most of them tend to be troublesome and rarely lead to untoward treatment. And of course, so some of them are positive, but a lot of them are negative. Prejudice is an attitude, feelings, behaviors, and beliefs. Prejudices are maintained through stereotypes. We create these stereotypes, and then it's a way of seeing individuals. So if you're going to stereotype, and I asked this yesterday, if you're going to stereotype American Indians, what would you say? Addison, what would you say?
Probably call them, those ones where we see basically drunks and
Drunk.
diabetics.
Yeah, diabetics, yeah. Yeah, well, of course, we were talking about health issues. But drunk is a big one, if they know anything about American Indians, what do they know? Well, they know that there's a lot of alcoholism on the reservations. But of course, there's 567 different tribes. A lot of them are completely assimilated. They lost their language and whatnot. Yeah, I don't know.
There's one I always keep hearing, go back to your reservation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one that usually hear a lot.
Go back to your reservation.
And it's like, it's funny because, this place
Where were you that they told you to go back to your reservation?
Utah area.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. Around Keenan area. No, those parts.
You know, it's kind of funny because if you go east of the Mississippi River, there's hardly any American Indians over there, for one thing. And they don't recognize the fact you guys still exist, for one thing. But probably they wouldn't tell you to go back to your reservation. They'd be, really? You're a Navajo? Oh, that's so cool. That's probably what they would say back east. But then they would have completely skewed ideas as to where you were and what was going on your reservation. They just have no idea. Even people that live in the West, sometimes they have no clue, just no clue. I was attending a wedding. It was a Mormon wedding up in Washington State. There's a lot of Mormons in Washington and Idaho, of course in Utah, Washington and Idaho. But I was attending a Mormon wedding, and I was talking to this guy, and I was about to. No, I was actually working on the Fort Belknap reservation, and this guy started telling me about Indians. Well, I thought that was kind of interesting. This Mormon fellow who's never seen them before, or maybe he has. Maybe he's seen the Hallville guys or the Spokane guys or something. Anyway, he was telling me all this horrible stuff about American Indians. I said, you're full of shit. I probably shouldn't have said that. He got really offended. I said, I work on the reservation. I know exactly who these people are, at least the people that I know. And I had interactions with the Blackfeet and the people at Fort Peck, and I knew all the people in Montana, and I knew that he was, just dead wrong. But of course, you couldn't convince him. Sadly, you couldn't convince him. And he would be one to say, go back to your reservation, I guess. Anyway, so there are stereotypes. There are stereotypes that are maintained. And it's really kind of tragic that we even have stereotypes. I have talked to people here about African Americans, and a lot of times I get stereotypes about African Americans from people here, which is kind of interesting. I've heard the N-word used here, and I'm thinking, really? Really? Come on. Stereotypes are. I'm sorry.
A lot of it's probably because of what they observe on TV
Oh, sure.
or social media.
Sure.
It's kind of like a learned behavior
Exactly.
from society in general.
Right.
Being that they have this other ethnicity that's coming onto the reserve and
Right.
stuff like that. But for me as a parent, usually what I talk to my kids about is basically identifying them
Right.
in the professional aspect.
Right.
Not putting fear into it, but having that sense of respect.
Right.
That's what parents should be.
Right. They should teach them the children to observe rather than to react. If you watch movies, if you watch a movie about the mafia, do you assume that all Italians are Goombas and they're wise guys and whatnot? Well, I hope not, but you watch some goofy movie about African American basketball players, and all of a sudden you think all African Americans are just like that guy, and they talk just like that, which isn't always true at all. So we do maintain these stereotypes, and a lot of times movies will support those stereotypes, television will support those stereotypes. That's one of the reasons why Bill Cosby was so important to, and I know he's probably done some really god-awful things. He's on trial right now, but the reality is he was like the first guy that everybody liked. And the reason they liked him was because he was funny and because he was self-effacing. And he was on television and you know, everybody liked him. So people felt more positively toward a group of individuals because of the one individual, which is really kind of tragic that he did the things that he did.
I think a lot of the influence comes from music too.
Yeah.
So the N-word, you have a lot of the younger individuals that even say it to one another.
Correct. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
because it's in the music.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It is in the music.
Yeah, and the lyrics.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, like that La Bamba movie,
Yeah.
is a lot of stereotype like that with
Right.
the older folks. Like,
Right.
it ain't my first or my last. You know,
Right.
They say that.
Yeah.
They kind of have that.
Never heard anybody say that.
Kinda have
That's
this
kind of
respect.
interesting. Yeah, and of course, if you start adopting some of the language from the rap music, then the B word becomes very prevalent in your vocabulary. And the F word, of course. And we won't use any of those three words at all. Stereotypes are beliefs about the personal attributes of a group of people based on overgeneralizations and inaccuracies and resistance to new information. I have always felt that in order to understand somebody, you have to live with them. So you have to be around them. You have to understand who they are. You have to become recognize their culture, or at least you can't become part of somebody's culture, but at least you can interact with the culture. And that's one of the reasons why I've always told people that if you visit someplace and you're there for 2 or 3 weeks, that doesn't mean anything at all. All you're doing is interacting with the people that are trying to sell you stuff. In order to understand, and of course Francis understands this because you travel a lot. You have to be someplace for an extended length of time, for a month, for 6 weeks, for 2 months, in order to become ingrained in that culture, in order to understand that culture. So visiting someplace means nothing. You have to live there. I mean, if somebody came to Saley and stayed here for 2 weeks, would they take a realistic attitude? Would they understand what was going on here? Would they understand the reservation? Would they understand, your culture to any extent whatsoever? No matter how much education they had prior to it. I read all of Hillerman. You know, Hillerman it gives you a lot of information, but you need to be able to apply that information to what is really here in order to understand what he was talking about. So you can read it, you can study it. I read the book Dene. It's the book that the history book of the Dene people. Evidently, you guys never hurt anybody. Evidently, they call your sports teams the Warriors, but if you read that book, it looks like people were picking on you, but you never retaliated. The Spanish came in. They talk about Chief Manuelito, and they took everybody and they put them over at Fort Sumner, not Summer, Fort Sumner with an N. And it says summer upstairs. It really drives me crazy. This is the word. Anyway, so what did he do? Was he a war chief, or you get the idea that there was no retaliation, but the reality is, of course, there was retaliation. There were Navajo raiders that would raid. I mean, people would come in, or people. Other tribes would come in, the Apache, the Comanche would come in and try to kidnap the children and some of the women and whatnot. So, Anyway, okay, so if you read the books, then you guys were very passive. And the reality is, of course, you were defending yourselves just like everybody else does. That's where the bows and arrows come from, right? And you stole horses. You stole things from the Spanish. Way to go. Good job. Okay, let's talk about the pariah of India. The Untouchables, or the Dalit, were the outcasts, or the people beyond the caste system. There, and I'm going to show you the caste system in just a second. As you will see, you will not see this word in the caste system. It's not there. It just doesn't exist, because these are people that are outside the caste. They are so rejected that they're not even recognized as humans. And they are referred to as the pariah, they're referred to as the Untouchables, they're referred to as the Dalit. Their jobs or habits involve polluting activities. Anything that nobody else wants to do, these guys get to do it. Let me show you. Let me see if I can do this. This is a dating site in India, if this thing comes up, and it's not going to work. Wait a minute. Maybe. Just leave this. Let me try this. Let me turn this thing off. There we go. Okay. All right. Let me show you something. Caste. Okay. These are the castes. All right. Oh, whoops! I lost it. Why is this happening to me? Anyway, the castes, there's like 150 different castes, okay? But Dalit is not one of them. Just a mass of names, Roman Catholic, Gupta, Patel, Khatri, and like I said, there's like 150 different castes. So if you wanted to date somebody, you would find somebody in your own caste. You're not supposed to date up. You're certainly not supposed to date down. So you try to stay within your own caste system, as odd as that may seem. And of course, there are several different religions in. As you can see, there are lots and lots of different religions. Oh, something just happened in India. A little 10-year-old girl was herding her family's cattle, and she was Muslim. And 10 Hindu men came and kidnapped her. They took her to a shack or something, and they systematically raped her until she died over a number of days. And now they're trying to decide what to do with these 10 men. If you remember, the same thing happened a number of months ago in India, where a woman was raped and killed on a bus while the bus was driving down the road. But they were of the same religion. They were all Hindus. And they were condemned to death. They haven't been put to death yet, but they've been condemned to death. So here we have 10 Hindus who have systematically raped and murdered a little 10-year-old girl. And there are people rioting in the streets to release these men. I know. So religion is pretty important in India.
Is it because of the religion?
Yeah, it's because she was a Muslim girl. And Muslims, if one of their women becomes tainted, they reject her. And that was the idea. Well, once the first guy raped her, then she wouldn't be able to go back home anyway. So it didn't really matter what happened to her after that. Besides that, she was a Muslim. And so the Hindu women are rioting in the streets, writing signs and saying, release the 10. as strange as that sounds, of course that sounds god awful to us, but if we were living in India, we would understand this completely. And of course, when somebody brings it up, they're going, oh, you know, you can't talk about that. You just can't talk about that. You can't deal with that. It's like dealing with a taboo as far as the Navajo are concerned. Really kind of fascinating. Anyway, okay, so everybody's different, right? And prejudices not only exist in the United States, but they also obviously exist all over the world. All over the world. Okay.
In Navajo culture, my grandparents used to tell me that if you were to, you know, rape somebody or
Right.
have sexual assault, you know,
Right.
against somebody else, what they would do was they used to cut off your limbs. And there's a story about sexual harassment and rape
Right.
in our traditional stories. And the snake was the one that offended, you know, the
Wilson told us that
the
story.
holy people. So he got his arms
Got his
cut
arms
off,
and legs cut off.
and he's just crawling around. So in our culture, they used to do that, or else, you know, they condemned it to death.
Right.
So they would kill these people. In our culture, they used to kill people because of what they do, their actions, rape, especially rape. It wasn't tolerated.
Right.
Yeah.
But that was within your own tribe.
Yeah.
What if somebody raped somebody from another tribe? Would they be condemned as well? Probably not. Yeah, I know. Okay. That's the situation here. These are Muslims, so they're thought of as outside. They're outside our own group. As we're going to find out, you can do anything you want to an untouchable. Anything you want. And they are the people that touch unclean things. If you are, this is really weird. We had when I was in the service, we had an Indian lady, Indian doctor. She was from India. She was a Brahmin. Since she was a Brahmin, she never touched anybody. Everybody was lower than she was. So as a doctor, if you came in to see her, she would ask you, you know, you'd say, I got a lump on my neck right here. And she'd say, well, push it. Is it hard? Yeah, it's kind of hard. Oh, okay. Well, see how far down it goes. You know, she wouldn't touch you. She wouldn't touch anybody. This is before everybody was wearing gloves, and she wouldn't touch anybody, literally. So her idea, she would sit behind her desk, and she would have somebody lay on the on the gurney, and she would say, "Well, you touch yourself right here and see what does that feel like? Tell me what that feels like." That's what she would do. It drove everybody nuts. The nurses just went crazy. Of course, the male nurses just thought it was stupid. Eventually, of course, she lost her job. Not only that, but what else did she do? She couldn't drive. She wouldn't drive. As a Brahmin, she didn't do that. So her husband had to drive. So she would call him on the phone. This is before cell phones, of course. So they had to make a connection. He was always staying at home. He was always at home waiting for her to call him so that he could drive her here or there or whatever. She would never go to any she wouldn't shake hands with people. She wouldn't go to any ceremonies. It was just bizarre. I don't know why in the world they ever allowed this lady to be a doctor. But this is right after, we used to draft doctors, and so we had all the doctors we needed. But then they decided that they were going to go to an all-volunteer Air Force. You remember that? Ronald Reagan's idea. So after they stopped drafting doctors, we started getting doctors from all over the place. Anybody that wanted to be a doctor that was willing to come to the United States, we would hire them. Anyway, it was terrible. It was just terrible. Not only that, the worst thing as far as we were concerned, she thought everybody had a parasite. And so how do you find parasites? Well, you look at somebody's stool specimen. So she would order stools on everybody. On everybody. She thought that Americans were the dirtiest people in the world. Of course, we're not. But practicing medicine in India, everybody does have parasites. I mean, there's a lot of parasites over there. So, you know, that is a really serious problem. So we were doing all these parasite checks and never finding anything. It was so irritating. And I don't know how much you like playing with poop, but I didn't really like it very much. And unfortunately, that was my job. Prejudice is a negative attitude toward a group or its members. Discrimination is a negative behavior toward a group or its members that's known as discrimination. While discrimination often has its sources in prejudicial attitudes, this does not have to be the case. Sometimes there is discrimination in the system, and people don't have those attitudes anymore. So they're not really prejudice, it's institutional discrimination. It has survived. A good example of institutional discrimination would be the laws that against sodomy. There are laws against sodomy, and why in the world did they ever pass these laws? Well, they were trying to arrest homosexuals, and now some states still have those anti-sodomy laws. There was a law in Mississippi and Louisiana against miscegenation. Miscegenation means that white people cannot marry people of a different race. In other words, they have to marry other white people. So white people can't marry black people. There's a movie out of miscegenation laws in Virginia where a white man wanted to marry a black woman. They made a movie of their struggle to get married because they couldn't, they wouldn't allow them to get married in Virginia. Nobody thinks about that there is a law on the docket that won't allow you to marry whoever the hell you want to marry. I've told you the story of my own situation. I wanted to marry my current wife. She was an officer and I was enlisted. Well, that's against the UCMJ. The UCMJ Article 37 says that enlisted personnel will not fraternize with officers. And here we were fraternizing. So we had to break federal law in order to get married. And we both got into a little bit of trouble. I got out of the service fairly quickly after that. About 2 years later, I got out of the service. But we were getting pressure from select individuals that this couldn't happen. One of the interesting things that happened to us, they couldn't send us to the same base. We had to be sent to different bases. So we could only go to bases, we could only serve, if we went to the same base, we had to serve in different organizations. And we were both medics. Of course, I was a lab tech and she was a hospital administrator. So she couldn't work in my hospital, or I couldn't work in her hospital. So the only assignment, there were 2 assignments that we took while we were married. One of them was to Germany, and she was assigned to Zweibrücken Air Force Base, and I was assigned to Ramstein, which is over the mountain. So literally I had to drive, just like this mountain here, I had to drive over the mountain, except it was like 25 or 30 miles. I had to drive over the mountain every day to go to work, because she was stationed at Zweibrücken and I was stationed at Ramstein. Then we took an assignment to Offutt Air Force Base. And I had worked in the hospital and she worked at headquarters. She worked at SAC headquarters. And that was the only way we were allowed to live together or live in the same proximity. But eventually, of course, it looked like it was going to disrupt her career. And because of that, I got out of the service. That and the fact that I'm pretty good at finding jobs. So I was a little more flexible than she was. It was a lot easier for me to find a job than it was for her to find a job. Because I was a lab tech, I also taught, and I was working. I had 2 master's degrees at the time, so it's a little bit easier for me. Anyway, that's institutional discrimination, the UCMJ. They practice that for good order. They don't want officers ordering somebody to, have sex with me right now. Airmen, they don't want that to happen.
They move you both around like furniture. So.
Yeah, well, we are furniture as far as they're concerned. Any job that involved ending a life such as fishing. If you know anything about the Hindus, they are almost exclusively vegetarians. So if you go to an Indian restaurant, don't order chicken. Well, try it, see what happens. Almost all of their food doesn't have meat in it. I guess they do eat fish to some extent. But if you're a Hindu, of course you can't kill anything. You certainly you don't slaughter beef. You would certainly not butcher a sheep. That's not something that is done. So they don't eat meat, and that may be one of the reasons why they're so god-awful skinny, because they don't take in protein they don't take in that much protein. But if you're an untouchable in India, that's your job. Your job is to butcher something. Your job is to touch things that are unclean. So they have the same taboo that you guys have. You're not supposed to touch anything dead, especially dead humans. So how in the world did they get rid of all their dead people?
Missionaries, outsiders.
Pariahs. Pariahs. These are the guys that come and collect the bodies. The Hindus are really kind of interesting. One of the things they do is you have to be buried within a select amount of time, but a lot of times they cremate, but other times they will just they'll put them in the Ganges River, the holy river, so that they can float down the river and go to heaven, which is pretty nasty if you think about it. You got all these dead bodies bobbing up and down in the river. If you're close enough to the river, that's what you do. You take the body, you wrap it up in a white cloth, and you put it in the river, as ugly as that seems. Killing or disposing of dead cattle or working with their hides is all done by the pariah. Okay, so the interesting thing is you'll call somebody on the telephone and you say, my uncle just died, and somebody needs to take him and do something with him. And they'll say, okay, it's taken care of. They don't say that these people will come, Razjit will come over and pick this guy up, because Razjit actually has a name, but you don't ever refer to him because he is a non-person. So it's just like, I need this taken care of. Well, don't worry, it's going to be taken care of. And the people that actually take care of it are invisible people, and that's exactly what the way they treat the pariah. So these individuals will go over and pick up the body and do whatever they have to do to it. Usually they don't embalm in India. Sometimes they will cremate bodies, but they certainly don't embalm them. Two institutional practices that support discriminatory practices are racism and sexism. Racism represents both an individual's prejudicial and discriminatory behavior toward people of a given race, and institutional practices that subordinate people of a given race. Sexism represents both an individual's prejudicial and discriminatory behavior toward people of a given sex, and institutional practices that subordinate people of a given sex. Sexism and racism. Any contact with human emissions, such as sweat, urine, or feces, is done by the untouchables. These are the individuals that clean out the latrines. If it has anything, and I don't know if you've never had anything to do with these individuals, but if somebody is sweating, they try not to sweat. They try not to emit anything. But if they do, of course, then they have to change their clothes and whatnot. And that's okay, you can touch your own sweat, but you can't touch anybody else's sweat. That is considered dirty. This included occupational groups such as sweepers and washermen. So if you needed your clothes washed, it wasn't somebody from your own family that did it. You had to hire somebody to come in and wash your clothes. Anybody that ate meat, of course, they were the ones that had to deal with whatever came out of them or off of them. This category included most of the primitive Indian hill tribes. So the people that lived in the lowlands were the individual, or the caste people, the hillmen. The people that lived up in the mountains, they were the ones that became the untouchables. And the reason they did it is because, first of all, they were conquered, and since they were conquered, they were the ones that they were able to control, as ugly as all this stuff sounds. Most of the women working as prostitutes in India are either pariah from India or women from the surrounding areas of India, such as Nepal and Bhutan. These individuals are considered fair game. If somebody is from Bhutan or somebody's from Nepal and they're in India, they have no status whatsoever. They don't refer to you at all. You can't go to a hotel because you can't check in. You have no status. One of the things they make you do when you go into a hotel is to write down your caste. And if you are of a low enough caste, they won't allow you to stay in that hotel. Only select individuals. So if you go to a 5-star hotel in India, then only select caste people can go. So if you're a Gupta, no, sorry, you're one step below where you need to be. The odd part is that if the husband is one thing and the wife is something else, which doesn't happen all that often, but if it's a mixed marriage and you've got somebody from 2 different castes, the caste that they are considered is the lower of the 2 castes, because he has tainted himself with somebody of a lower caste. Does this
So
sound?
it's still like this today?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And we think it isn't, because when you go over there, and actually I've never been over there, but we sent a group over there from Fort Belknap. They went on a Fulbright trip to India. You don't even think about it, but it's there. And if you get somebody to translate what you're looking at, it's all in Hindi. But if you get somebody to translate it, it talks about all these caste systems and whatnot, and what caste you have to be in order to get into that hotel. And of course, they got all this information. They didn't get this when they first went over there, because when they first went over there, they talked to the government, and the government doesn't want them to seem backward. And so they just gave them all this positive information. But then they started going to the colleges and universities in India. And when they talked to the first university, of course, that university is one of the more elite schools in the country, and they didn't tell them this information either. And the second institution they went to was a middle class institution, and then the last one was like a community college. And at the community college, they were educated on what really happens in India, and they were told all of these things. That was 20 years ago. Does it still exist today? Yeah, it does. Well, obviously it does. We have this situation where 10 Hindu men raped and murdered a 10-year-old Muslim woman, and the Hindu women are rioting in the streets to get them released because they did nothing wrong as far as they're concerned. Yeah.
So these merchants, these Indian individuals
Right.
from that country, such as males or females, that come to America, they become merchants of these fast food chains like hotels and stuff like that. Majority you'll see
Right.
them in there.
Right.
I wonder if they bring that culture with them, and I wonder if they treat people of ancestry like from India coming to them, and I wonder if that's how they treat them as well.
I've run into this before, and you can always tell when you go into a motel that has that's owned by somebody from India, because it smells like curry, doesn't it? I know, it drives you crazy. I don't like curry personally. I'm not a fan of curry. It's too hot for me. Yeah, the longer they've been in the United States, the less they act this way. Because in the United States, of course, we don't really have a caste system, but we do. But it's not nearly as stringent as it is in India, and for that reason, of course. Have you ever been to India? Did you ever travel to India?
No.
Okay.
No. I was employed by several of them in Flagstaff area. Wherever, when you go into a room, they'll lock it, like a storage area or a warehouse, and
Because you're gonna
this
steal
is, you need to clean this, and then they lock it. There's like a cage door, so it's so weird.
Yeah.
or you,
They locked you in?
They lock you in.
Oh my God.
And it was strange because he said, well, if something catches on fire, how do you get out? He goes, it's not my problem.
It's not my problem.
There's the window I can.
So they treated you like a lower caste person?
Yeah, that's what I know. Now that you're talking
Yeah.
about it, like
Yeah.
even like touching or like they won't.
Yeah, they won't touch
And
you.
then if you like in some cases they would have maids or housemen and they wouldn't touch the linen or anything like that. Clean.
Right.
It was always like done with other like housemen or housekeepers and even just like disposal of stuff is just
Not done.
Mhm.
They don't touch that stuff.
no.
I'm
But
sorry.
the weirdest part was when they lock you in. And I was, wait a minute, this don't feel right. So, I had to leave that scene.
So they're treating you like a lower caste individual. The higher the caste they are, the more they will treat you that way. Brahmin don't leave India. They're treated like gods there. So why in the world would they ever leave? This is the lady that I ran into as a doctor when I was in the service. It's the only Brahmin I've ever met. Well, I've never been to India, but she's the only Brahmin I've ever met. And it was odd because, you would say something to her, well, look at this, and you try to hand it to her and she would take it and you go, what's going on? And she'd look at you like, what the hell's wrong with you? This lady, if you ever interacted with her, she was always backing up, trying to stay away from you. She not only didn't want to touch you, she didn't want your air to get on her, so she was always trying to move away from you. She wouldn't come into the laboratory. If she needed some information, she'd call up on the telephone, and if you needed to give her a report, you could never give it to her. You'd always, the other doctors, you go to their office and you hand them a report. But with her, you couldn't get into her office. There was always somebody that you had to hand it to. And she'd say, oh, okay, well, either I'll send my nurse down or I want you to give this to my nurse. You could never catch her. It was just bizarre. So we actually didn't see her very much. It was just irritating as hell. Arrogant. I don't know. It's just really arrogant. It seems arrogant to me, as it probably did to you. I didn't mean to bring up any negative memories of your trying to work for these people. I know. The sad thing about the prostitution in India, there are a lot of very, very poor people. If you are of a select caste, and they actually pay you by your caste. So if you're a relatively high caste, you can expect to get 100,000 rupees or whatever. You're going to make a lot of money. But if you're of a lower caste, even though you're doing the same job, and you may be doing that job better than anybody else, but they will pay you by your caste. So if you're an untouchable, they pay you, pennies, even though you're doing something that they need done. And they appreciate the fact that at least you're allowing them to do work and to get money. So a lot of these families are very, very, very extremely poor, and they live in hovels. And that's one of the reasons why they sell these girls into prostitution. And one of the arguments for the 10-year-old Muslim girl that was raped and murdered was the fact that, they were going to sell her into prostitution anyway. That's the idea. Because they're Muslim. Okay, I know. It's ugly, ugly, ugly. Thank God we don't have a caste system in the United States. Or do we have the caste system in the United States? How do we quantify people in the United States? How do we know if somebody's a higher caste or a lower caste?
I think probably only some castes will probably only exist in religion probably.
Okay,
Like
that's a good point.
in some areas where men and women are separated, they can do stuff, and some hold for instance some can't hold a priesthood, or some not allowed. Even the color, some can't even attend that church. They can't get fully membership because they're a different color.
What about Mormons?
Yeah, exactly. Those like with that, it was Mormons. You know, some of them can't get the fully priesthood, and because they're probably Native American or African American or of the different descendant.
Okay.
So you know, but you see them some doing their missionary work,
Right.
and they don't get the fully what they were honored to do. Like and several members are fully members of the Mormon Church.
Well, if you interact with, so you come in contact with somebody who's a Mormon. How do they, and you're not a Mormon. I don't know what you are. I'm just, but let's pretend you are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How do they treat you as somebody that's from outside their church? Do they treat you well? Do they treat you?
I think it's probably more assuming what they assume what they probably hear from the other missionaries' work, or maybe how they were probably trained. Maybe.
If you go to the Presbyterian church, what's the right answer? What's the right way to worship God if you're a Presbyterian?
Pray.
Yeah, but what's the right way to do it? Don't you have to pray as a Presbyterian? I mean, if you didn't think that your way was the right way, okay. So if you go to a church, Seventh-day Adventist, Church of the Nazarene, Church of God, Church of Christ, Catholic, Lutheran, you know, the reason you go to that church is because you're going to go to heaven because that is the right way to worship God. And if you're somebody else from another church, there's something incorrect about the way that you worship. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I see it. I've seen several other churches where it's a different, you know, they congregate in big masses. Sometimes they'll be in small masses. Sometimes they'll be separated, and sometimes they'll be even out of the church. And sometimes we'll be in.
So if you're not a member of that church, are you as good as they are? Well, let's ask Travis.
Yes.
I mean, the reason I go to this church is because they're telling me how to go to heaven. Isn't that right? So if this is the right road, that must be the wrong road, right? So since I get to go to heaven, doesn't that make me better than everybody, than the person on the wrong road? Even if there's lots of people. Okay. So it is kind of a caste system. Religion is a caste system.
I've asked that question once with one of the missionaries. I go, why do everybody worships God or Jesus, and there's like so many of churches and religion, and there's one person they all worship. And he explained it to me where he says it's just like everything's like a big chandelier, and everybody's going that same light, and they're just praising and.
So everybody gets to go to heaven. All the religions are correct. So why in the world would you follow his religion?
It's a faster way.
There's a church that here, local church, they have that saying, or they begin to. I don't know if I don't know if it's a Mormon church.
I thought it was an ecumenical church.
I don't know.
Isn't this church over here the Blue Church? Isn't there a Blue Church over here?
No, behind the NHA housing.
Yeah,
Church.
yeah. It's an ecumenical church.
Oh, okay.
So
My aunt goes over there and they were telling her that
is she going to go to heaven?
you're gonna have to put away your medicine bundle.
Ah.
You're gonna have to put away. You're not going to heaven. I'm sorry. That's the devil way of praying. You're gonna have to put that away, burn it or trash it, give it away. You have to come and yeah. So they told her to
Burn medicine bundles? My God, that's...
they told her that, you know, if you want to go to heaven, this is the way. This is the righteous way. And,
See, there's one way. I told you there was one way. You just got to figure out which one's the right one.
So,
This is tragic to me, you know, and I don't usually brag about not being religious, but this is one of the reasons why I'm not religious. Because there are stupid people telling other individuals that whatever you believe is incorrect, and you have to destroy what you believe in order for you to get to go to heaven. That just irritates me to no end. So Edison's in the back going, he knows the way. Okay, Edison, what's the right way? Tell us the right way to go to heaven. Is that it?
I just live here.
Of course, I wrote my dissertation up in Montana. They had missionary schools up there. And if you went to the Catholic missionary school, the federal government had a missionary school at one place, and then the Catholic Church had one at the other end of the reservation. And the kids that went to the missionary school were told that if the kids that went to the other school were sinners, they referred to them as sinners, and that the only way to go to heaven was to go to this missionary school. And so all the other kids were heathens. They were heathens, and the good kids were at the missionary school. And of course, the sad part was, these guys were all relatives, and here they're telling the kids at the other school were not going to go to heaven, and that they were sinners, just because they didn't go to the right church. Anyway, I'm not going to get into religion. I think this is a tragedy. I personally think this is a tragedy. Trying to confuse people. Yeah, I try to give you all this information, and most of the information is fairly nebulous, but at least I'm not telling you, this is the only way to believe, you can only think this one way. I think that's horrible. Racial prejudice is prejudice against people of a specific race or ethnicity. I'm sure that from time to time, you have suffered from racial prejudice or ethnic prejudice. Okay. Racial prejudice has led to some fairly horrendous genocides throughout the world, including with your own population. And that's one of the reasons why you talk so much about Bosque Redondo, about Fort Sumner, about the military coming in and moving you from here to there in the long walk that took, it was, 300 miles or whatever it is. Anyway, and so many people died. There's a chart upstairs. I don't go to the fourth floor very often, but I was up there last night, and they were talking about all the natives at Fort Sumner, and each year and how it increased over all those years, the people at Fort Sumner. Racial separation was one of the hallmarks of the United States that persisted well into the 1970s. The boarding schools, the Indian boarding schools, were intact until the 1970s. With a history of 400 years of racial separation, it is unrealistic to assume that old wounds will heal automatically, of course, and most of that has to do with African Americans and white people. And of course, one of the problems we've had in the last 2 or 3 years is black males being shot in the streets. It usually it isn't en masse, of course. It tends to be only one individual, but it still shouldn't happen. Are they being shot because of prejudice? And the answer is probably yes. This is the way it looked before civil rights, before the 1950s, before the 1960s, before the 1970s. There were different restrooms for different races. And of course they also had water fountains for different groups. So if you were black, you couldn't drink out of a white water fountain. Help wanted, white only. White only, this is a waiting area. Collared waiting room. If you're colored, you have to sit in the balcony. If you're African American, you have to sit in the back of the bus. That was the way it was in the South. What was the rationale that they used? Well, it's time to stop. What was the rationale they used for segregating African Americans from white people? What was the rationale that they used? there was a very logical reason for this. Wouldn't you rather be around your own people? Oh, okay, that was it. They want to be with their own people. That's why they didn't want to educate black people and white people. Well, you want to be with your own people. You feel more comfortable with your own people. That was the right. I'm sorry. Okay, we'll finish this chapter. We actually may get done with all my lecture before the end of the semester, which might be exciting because you don't have to come to class at all. Anyway, yeah, okay, I'll see you guys next week. As much fun as that is, and we'll talk more about this kind of stuff. And what I want you to think about, and maybe what we will talk about next week, is how you feel about other tribes of American Indians. Can we talk about that? It's really fascinating to me. Up north, they talk about all the other tribes all the time, but down here, wow, you guys never talk about them. Or the Apache. And they're right here. They're right here. I mean, the Hopi Reservation is inside the Navajo Reservation. Right? Never, it's not. Who am I talking about? Yeah, okay.
Who are they?
Who are those guys?
Are they traders?
Who were the first people at Bosque Renata?
No.
No.
Kawa.
No.
Apaches.
Yikaria.
I used to have roommates who were all different types of
Oh my
Indians. They had
God.
Hopi, they had Apache.
Good, you can tell us the real story about these
It
people.
was really, I was the only Navajo, and I think there was another one that was a Navajo, but she was really quiet. And it was like we had a 4-bedroom apartment, so we survived by all pitching portions of the rent. And
You all lived together in
we got along
harmony.
we got along pretty good. I think it was the TV that probably saved us all.
We'll write a book about how I got along with Hopi. We'll see you, Travis. This drives me crazy. I can't.
I actually had a relationship for 10 years with.
Oh, that's right. You did. You had a girlfriend that was different. She wasn't one of the people.
Yeah.
Well, she wasn't. If she wasn't one of the people, what was she?
Okay.
One of the other people?
They came from the Kaikotami village.
Yeah. And they don't consider you people either, do they?
But I've seen some Navajos around there on the Hopi land.
Sure.
So I was like, okay, I'm not the only Navajo.
But we had Navajos up on Fort Bell.
I think I've done the majority of my.
Okay.
No discussion.
Okay.
So I'll like this week.
Okay.
My discussion, short, not too short, but maybe paragraph.
Paragraph, yeah. 4 lines. If it's not 4 lines, then I'm not going to give you an option.
Okay.
Okay. My assumption is that the more you talk to me, the more you're thinking about what I the question I'm asking. So if you only give me like 2 lines,
Because I tend to over exaggerate about,
that's fine.
chapters. I did that last night, kind of went overboard. I was like 1.5 pages, and I was like, this is just too much.
Yeah.
And that was chapter 3.
Oh, okay.
Chapter 3, abnormal psychology. Because almost everything relates or can compare. Or
This is perfect.
it's like amazing. The only part that's the biological part of it.
Right.
But the electric shocks, magnetic, how to use magnetic, that's what we use.
For your VA?
They have therapy like that, traditional therapy, where they have magnets. They use they have stones. So you would put that on it's your head, You put it around your head 4 times.
Maybe we stole it from you guys.
And then you put it on your head like this magnetic,
Yeah.
and you would massage it.
Uh-huh.
Balance. That's why we use a lot of stones. I don't know if you noticed that. So
I try not to notice that.
we use a lot of stones. And
Several
there's
classes
different places where
enough to
you
get me
can
through
feel
both,
they have
summer,
magnetic. We
fall
call
and
them
spring.
the spiritual homes. The
Right.
spiritual home of.
At least that's
certain
what
rock
I'm aiming at right
Right.
now.
And you would go there and you could feel it, the difference.
Sedona.
feel the
And they're crystals.
Yes.
Exactly. Okay.
So